My most epic Mistland build is finally complete. Hey everyone, my name is Smitty, and today I'll be building a massive dwarven fortress at the peak of this Mistland mountain. I'll be showing you all the different parts that make up this epic build, and give you a peek into my thought process throughout. Hope you all enjoy, but without further ado, grab a snack, grab a drink, and let's get right into it. My first objective was to build a very grand staircase going up to the fortress. The location I had chose had a nice cut through the mountain that was going to be a perfect spot for squeezing in some stairs. Knowing that these stairs were going to cover a lot of ground, rather than just filling the entire area with the marble foundation, I decided to build a shell the stairs could sit on. And this meant that I could save on both instance and time, which are really important to consider when taking on a larger build project such as this. Being this high in the mountain, I also realized that I could create this cool effect where the stairs actually disappear into the mist. And this really maintained that element of mystery and fantasy that the Mistlands do such a good job of creating. With the stairs complete, it was time to add a base layer foundation. I again placed my marble blocks on top of a mesh just to save on instance and help speed up the process, but I then filled in this bowl-like area within the mountain. Now that I had the foundation to build on, my focus went back to the stairs. I had this nice little pinch point between the two mountains that I decided would be a good spot to build the front gate and wall. When building walls, my main concern is leaving them too flat, so I always try to experiment with patterns that add relief and texture to the sides. In this case, I utilized the angled marble pieces and marble arches to create a design for the wall braces / supports. And again, it just adds a little bit more depth, which I really like. To add some additional detail, I utilized the metal walls to create what looks like a gate that is currently lifted open, and then added some diverger lanterns and blue banners to add a little more contrast color to the wall. I replicated this same thing on the other side, and our gate was complete. Behind the walls, I wanted to start working on what would be the first of many scattered forges throughout the fortress. In almost all fantasy worlds, I feel like dwarves seem to be known for being incredible smiths, so it made sense to me that this fortress would have a very specific focus on forging powerful weapons. For this forge structure, I started by elevating it into the side of the mountain, and I decided to create some pillars that would angle up into the mountain and create a ribbed look. I considered closing up the sides, but ultimately decided to keep the open feel so that the forge would still be visible from the outside. For the forge itself, I really wanted this to feel like it was part of the mountain, and so I pushed it back into the rocks as much as I could, framing it with the angled marble pieces and walling it off with the 2x2 blocks. I wanted to distinguish this forge from the others, and the large face and high ceilings I think really help it feel more grand, which I like. I then needed to figure out how I wanted the smoke to filter up the rocks. I decided to go for a circular chimney design that tapered as it continued up. With the chimney complete, the structure for the main forge was done. Again, I really liked how this felt built into the mountain and well integrated into its environment. Next, I wanted to develop the left side of my main forge. My thought for this area was to build a stairway that would go up and connect to the upper level of the forge, but then I also wanted to squeeze a smaller forging area if I was able. was a pretty tight space, but ultimately I was able to fit a smaller design right into the corner. Next, I needed to find a way to bridge the two levels of the build. I had to mine away a little bit of land to give myself space to work with, but eventually I was able to connect the stairways in a way that made sense and still felt integrated into the environment. Moving on to the right side of the forge, I knew that building this direction would cause me to eventually wrap up the mountain, but I started by building a smaller archway and bridge before eventually building up into the cliffs. Perhaps this could have been a defensive choke point, and I like the idea of creating a bunch of bridges and archways that overlap, so this would be something that I would continue to incorporate throughout the build. I then moved on to creating the larger stairway that would work its way up the mountain. My tentative idea here was to build a larger defensive structure at the top of this peak, but I first needed to build out more foundations surrounding it. Building my way across the side of the mountain, I had the idea of creating another bridge that actually sits on top of the staircase I just built. And this archway would be similar to the one I just built, but much larger in scale and feel a little more grand. Luckily enough, the height of this bridge was pretty similar to that of the upper level of my forge, and so this meant that I could connect them, and I was really starting to like the looping and interconnectedness of all the walls and bridges in the build. With the second bridge complete, I was really loving the sense of varied heights of the different structures, and it just felt very vertically dynamic, which I really liked. Next came one of the more challenging parts of the project. Again, I knew I wanted to build some type of garrison structure on top of this mountain, but I really wasn't sure of the design, and the location proved to be quite challenging with all the rocks. I figured my best course of action would be to just start with a large, flat platform at the top, and hopefully from there some ideas would come to mind. Initially, I was also concerned that this was just going to look like a big box on a hill, so I made sure to add some depth to the sides of my foundation by adding some protruding pillars and angled supports. As I continued to work, I also realized that I wanted the stairs to be centered in the front of the structure instead of to the side, so I built out an additional platform from which the stairs could be built into the structure itself. With the platform complete, it was time to start building in the actual structure. I decided I want to maintain a similar style to that of the forge I had built below, in which I built a pattern of angled pillars that create a bit of a ribbed effect when you put them next to each other. Building up this high and using heavy material like marble, it's a little bit tricky getting the structural integrity to hold up, but by lining some of the pillars with the wood iron beams, I was eventually able to get everything to stay in place without falling apart. I did have to add a couple of extra pillars, but overall I think it still fits in nicely with the structure, so I wasn't too concerned. I pushed out the floors beyond the pillars because I wanted to create a balcony that slightly overhung from the edge of the structure. I was able to alternate the angled marble pieces to create this interesting, almost woven look to the side, which I really liked, and then connected the pillars with some arches. I threw on some Dvergr lanterns and some blue jute banners to remain consistent with my theme, but interestingly enough, I was getting so high up in this build that everything actually started becoming covered with snow, which meant that the blue banners were actually more white, but I didn't mind it much. I think it actually looked kind of cool the way it transitioned as we went up. With that, the garrison structure was complete. I still have to decorate it more, but I liked how it was strategically positioned to overlook the front gate, and theoretically a garrison could provide support from above. The next thing I wanted to do was create a large bridge that connected the garrison structure to the mountain in the back. Thankfully, this was close enough that the wood iron beams would reach all the way across and would support the marble pieces of the bridge. I made sure that there was still an opening for the wall walkways that ran underneath, and then also added some battlements to make it pop a little bit more. When it was all done, I really liked the way this bridge turned out, as it just added another layer of verticality to the build, and just felt really dwarven too. At first I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with this area of the mountain, but then I thought back to the story behind this build and how this dwarven fortress was meant to be a large forging operation. So I decided to build a smaller forge here, but first I would have to establish another platform on top of the rocks. Again, I would go for a circular design that tapered as it went up. This time I would add more of a spire at the top that made it stand out a little more in the backdrop of the rest of the fortress. Nothing groundbreaking, but I think it's clean, well designed, and placed in a really nice spot here at the top of these rocks. My next project in the build was to do something with this really dramatic looking rock that shoots out at the top of my mountain. Due to its challenging shape, I knew that the only way I could build up this rock face was with the custom stair technique by placing wood floors on top of each other. This took a little bit of time as I wanted it to spiral all the way up the rock, but the end result looks really cool and I was really happy with how it worked out. At the top of my stairs, I wanted to create some element of story here. It seemed like a very significant spot, and so we needed to have something to carry on that feeling. Since this fortress is a forge, I thought that framing a rare weapon up here would make sense. Like perhaps this is the finest weapon that these dwarves have forged or something like that. Overall, I was really happy with the result. I think it has a really epic view up here, and thought it added a nice little element of story to the build. The next task I wanted to complete was to build a keep or structure that would house the dwarves, a place they could eat and sleep when they weren't working in the forges. There was a bit of room on the stone slabs above my main forge, and so I began by building an entrance. This was a bit tricky for me because there really wasn't a ton of room to work with. I ended up having to extend the floor of the structure out past the rocks to give myself a little more space, and then continue to block in the structure with marble. Similar to the garrison structure and walls throughout the build, my main concern was ensuring that the keep wasn't flat, blocky, and uninteresting. So I put a lot of effort into making sure that the sides and top of the structure had some good depth to them. On this open face in particular, I decided to switch things up a little bit and build out a balcony that would take advantage of the great view it had. I realized I also needed to find a way to get to the second floor of this structure, so I utilized a spiral staircase as it's spatially the most efficient way to do that. On the inside, I built out a hearth, as my plan for this room was to be a place where the dwarves could gather, rest, and feast. I'd have to decorate it more later, but I at least needed an idea of where the hearth would be positioned and how much space I'd have left. I then decided to kick out this wall as I had an idea to build down below the foundation and create a basement level. The nice thing here is that some of the keep is somewhat suspended in the air, and it creates a nice cavity below where I could build out a basement. I continued to build down and built out a new platform for the basement. My thought here was that maybe this would be where the dwarves would sleep, so my plan was to decorate this and furnish this more of a room or a sleeping space later. I continue to build the foundation down to the ground, but I really love the way this build feels integrated into the mountain. And by running all the way from the bottom of the mountain to the top, it does feel quite grand. I then had the idea that it'd be cool if there was this side passage that connected the upper forge to the keep, so I built out a quick custom placed walkway that looped itself around. I threw in some core wood beams below the wooden floors just to make it look a little more supported, but I was really happy with how it looked, kinda like this secret passage back to the forge. With that, my keep was complete. This was definitely a tricky structure to build, and I struggled in different parts of it, but I liked how it's framed by the forges in the front, and I think the back of the structure looks really cool with the under area really built into the mountain. Looking around my build, I know there were a couple of last areas that I wanted to develop. I knew I wanted to add another forge, and this area below the garrison looked like a good spot to place one. After taking some time to build out the platforms, I again would keep consistent with a circular forge design, utilizing the angled marble blocks to create the tapered shape towards the top. I then needed to bring out the battlements of the surrounding walls in order to remain consistent with the rest of the fortress, but I was really happy I was able to tuck in another small forge into this spot, and I think it looks pretty cool. Taking a final look at my build, I realized that the rock formation to the left of my gate looked a little bare, and I decided it would be cool to have another defensive structure or tower over here. I knew I wouldn't be able to build up to it from the gate, so alternatively I decided to create a winding wood pathway on the backside of the rock formation. It took a little bit of time, but I really like how this pathway follows the contour of the rock and winds its way up to the location where I wanted to build the tower. For the tower itself, I didn't want to do anything crazy. It didn't need to be super tall, but just something that could provide an additional layer of defensive support to the front gate. I added some battlements and then decided to mount a ballista as well to watch over the gate. At this point, looking over my build, I was pretty happy where it was at. I thought it had a nice composition against the mountain, had a good bit of layering, and a nice sense of verticality to it. All that was left to do was clean it up a little bit, add some decorations, and cue the cinematic.